Hey guys, tonight we are traveling back in time. Not to a battlefield or a royal court, but to a place of quiet focus and immense, unseen power, a medieval Irish monastery. This isn't a story of grand adventure, so you probably won't get eaten by a dragon, but the sheer mind-numbing patience required for the task ahead might make you wish for one. It's a journey into the meticulous, almost meditative art of making the very substance that carried knowledge through the soul miners called Dark Ages ink. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and maybe drop a comment below letting me know what city you're listening from, and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to see where our little community gathers from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on the fan for that soft background tone, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice is the cold. It's a deep, penetrating chill that seeps up from the stone floor, through the thick wall of your hammock, and settles deep into your bones. You're not waking from sleep, but rather from a moment of lost concentration, your head lifting slowly from your work. You are in the scriptorium, the writing room of a monastery perched on the green, windswept coast of Ireland in, let's say, the 9th century. The air is still and heavy. The silence here isn't empty. It's filled with tiny, important sounds, the whisper of a page turning somewhere behind you, the distant, rhythmic clang of the blacksmith's hammer from the forge, and the lonely cry of a gull carried on the wind that rattles the wooden shutters. Your world is a small circle of light. It falls from a high, narrow window, a slit in the thick stone wall, illuminating the slanted wooden desk before you. This sliver of daylight is your most precious resource, more valuable than bread or wine. It dictates your working hours, and its quality dictates the quality of your work. On a day like this, with the clouds moving like a grey river across the sky, the light is soft, diffuse, and constantly changing. You have to lean in close, your nose just inches from the page. And then there's the smell. It's a complex perfume of oldness. There's the damp, earthy scent of the stone walls, the faint, sweet aroma of beeswax from a distant candle, and under it all, the dry, slightly animal tang of parchment. This isn't paper you're working on. It's vellum, the prepared skin of a cow. Scrape, stretch, and treated until it is a creamy, durable surface. Each sheet represents a small fortune in labor and resources, and the codex you are copying, the book of songs, is worth more than the land the monastery sits on. You are a guardian of knowledge. In a world where empires have crumbled and libraries across the continent have been lost to fire and chaos, this remote island has become a bastion of literacy and art. The work you and your brothers do here is a quiet act of defiance against the encroaching darkness. You are preserving the words of saints, scholars, and poets, one painstaking letter at a time. This is a mainstream historical fact that is hard to overstate. Irish monasteries were vital centers for the preservation and production of knowledge that shaped the course of Western civilization. Before a single letter is formed, however, the page must be prepared. You reach for a small, perforated pot, almost like a salt shaker. This is your pound spot, a wonderfully quirky and often overlooked tool of the trade. Inside is a fine, chalky powder, likely made from ground cuttlefish bone or pumice. You sprinkle it lightly across the vellum, then rub it gently with a soft, clean cloth. This tiny ritual removes any lingering grease from the animal skin, creating a slightly abrasive, matte surface that ensures the ink will bite into the vellum, not bead up or bleed. It's a small, meticulous step, but absolutely essential. Your back aches. You've been sitting on this hard wooden bench since the morning bell, and the cold has made your joints stiff. You flex your fingers, trying to bring some warmth back into them. To your right sits your brother scribe, a man so still and silent, he seems to have become part of the stonework. But who is to your left? Is there anyone? Historians still debate what this room, your workspace, truly looked like. Some envision a large, communal hall, a true scriptorium, in the grand sense, with long tables of monks working side minus by minus side in disciplined silence. But other scholars argue for a more solitary existence, pointing to evidence of small wooden cubicles, or carols, set against the cloister windows to maximize the precious light. These would have offered a sliver of privacy and protection from drafts. The truth is, it likely varied from monastery to monastery, and from century to century. So perhaps your room is merely a small, personal alcove, your whole world condensed into this nook of stone and light. You look down at the page. One column is already filled with your neat, rounded script. The other column is blank, waiting that your ink pot, a simple horn set into a hole in your desk, is running perilously low. The ink within is a deep, satisfying blade, but you can see the bottom. The thought of making more fills you with a mix of weary resignation and quiet pride. It is a slow, demanding process, a craft within a craft. The quality of a manuscript is judged not just by the beauty of its letters, but by the permanence and richness of its ink. And yours must be perfect. That ink has to be perfect because what you are doing is not merely copying. It is an act of preservation that borders on the divine. You believe, with every fiber of your being, that the words you are transcribing are holy. They are the songs of David, the wisdom of the Gospels. To render them in a fleeting, imperfect medium would be more than just poor craftsmanship. It would be a form of blasphemy. The ink is the vessel, the physical body given to a sacred spirit. It must be as enduring and as profound as the text itself. This is why you and your brothers are known not just as scribes, but as custodes monuum, guardians of the hands. You guard the traditions of the hand, and that includes the very substance it applies to the page. The ideal ink is a deep, penetrating black. When you draw a line with it, it should be crisp and decisive. It should not feather or bleed into the porous vellum, creating a fuzzy, indistinct letter. It must sit upon the surface, yet bind to it chemically, becoming one with the skin. And most importantly, it must last. It must be proof against the slow, insidious bleaching of sunlight and the creeping damp of an Irish winter. It must remain as black and vivid for your great minus grand minus nephews, should they join this monastery a century from now. As it is for you today, you've seen the consequences of failure. You've examined older manuscripts from other lands, brought here by traveling monks, where the ink was poorly made. Unsewn, the writing has faded to a ghostly, rust-minus-colored shadow, a pale whisper of what was once a bold decoration. It is a frustrating and sorrowful sight, a text slowly losing its voice. But there is a far worse fate. This is a strange little bit of chemistry that you know through observation, a piece of hard minus one institutional knowledge, a badly balanced ink, one with too much of the acidic iron component, becomes hungry. Over the decades and centuries, it doesn't just fade, it consumes. It slowly, relentlessly eats away at the very vellum it was meant to sanctify, leaving behind a brittle, lacework of holes where the holy words used to be. The word becomes a void. The idea that your work could literally self-destruct is a scribe's deepest nightmare. This pursuit of perfection is also a matter of brutal economics. The vellum you are working on is astonishingly expensive. You try not to think about the flock of cows that represents the codex you're recopying, or the weeks of labor spent by your brothers in the tanning sheds to prepare these skins. A single mistake, a spilled pot of ink, a poorly minus mixed batch that ruins a page, is a catastrophic waste. The finished book will be a treasure of the kingdom. It is not something to be measured in shillings, but in its ability to be traded for peace, to secure alliances, or to be gifted to a king to ensure his favor. Its value is immense, and every drop of ink that touches it must be worthy of that value. This is why you rely on a specific type of ink, the gold standard of the medieval world. The mainstream understanding of this is that nearly all important European manuscripts for over a millennium were written in what we now call iron galling. It was a remarkable chemical innovation, created from a mixture of 4 key component soap galls, vitriol iron sulfate, water, and a binder like gum arabic. It undergoes a chemical reaction that makes it incredibly permanent, unlike carbon-based inks, like a soot ink, which simply sit on the surface. Iron gall ink bonds with the vellum and oxidizes, creating that coveted, indelible black. When you make it correctly, it is the closest thing to writing with eternity itself. Yet, how you make it is a closely guarded secret. This is a point that historians and manuscript analysts still puzzle over. Was there a single, definitive recipe passed around Europe? Or was it a far more localized and personalized art form? Chemical analysis of surviving manuscript shows subtle variations in the ink from different regions and monasteries, suggesting that scribes were constantly tinkering with their formulas. There was no medieval patent office, no standardized recipe book you could just open. The knowledge was passed from a master scribe to his apprentice. Often orally, you have your monastery's recipe, a precise set of steps and proportions that you learned from the old brother Chiron, now gone, who learned it from the master before him. You trust this recipe, this tradition, because you have seen its results in the library's oldest, most revered books. Their pages are still crisp, their ink still as black as a raven's wing. It is your inheritance, and your responsibility to get it right, just as they did. So as you stare at the dregs in your ink horn, you feel the full weight of this tradition. This isn't just a chore to be completed. It is the beginning of a ritual. You will have to leave the relative warmth and silence of the scriptorium and venture out. The first step of your quiet, sacred process begins not in a workshop, but out in the down, ancient woods that surround your stony enclave. The quest for perfect black begins with a search for a strange and humble treasure growing on an oak tree. With a soft sigh that is mostly unheard, you push your bench back. The scrape of wood on stone sounds in a vinculum loud in the quiet room. Rather than on docent look up, his focus an unbreakable thread connecting his eyes to the page. You give a slight, almost imperceptible nod in his direction anyway, a silent acknowledgement of your shared purpose, and move towards the heavy oak door. Pushing it open, you step out of the dim, dusty scriptorium and into the raw, damp air of the cloister garth. The sudden chill feels almost cleansing. The sky above the small, square courtyard is a swirling canvas of greys, and the air smells of wet earth and stone. You pull your woolen cowl further over your head and make your way across the courtyard. Your leather minus, soled shoes making soft slapping sounds on the damp flagstones. You pass the herb garden, its neat rows looking forlorn in the weak light. Their summer vibrancy now muted 2 shades of brown and dark green. You exit the main monastery gate, leaving the world of ordered stone and prayer behind, and step into the domain of nature. The path immediately softens under your feet, turning from gravel to mud. The oak forest greets you like a vast, breathing entity. The trees here are old, their thick trunks covered in a velvet of green moss, their branches gnarled and twisted like the arthritic fingers of old men. The ground is a spongy carpet of fallen leaves, moss, and rich, black soil. The air grows cooler still, and the silence deepens, broken only by the drip of water from a million leaves and the occasional, distant call of a crow. This is the ancient forest of Ireland, a place that feels untouched by time, a world away from the disciplined life within the monastery walls. This is a subject of quiet debate among modern scholars who study your era. They wonder about the very nature of this forest you are walking through. Is it truly a wild, untamed wilderness where you must forage like a hunter, or is it something more akin to a managed resource? Some evidence suggests that monasteries like yours, so reliant on the forest's bounty, may have cultivated specific growth. Perhaps the path you walk, worn smooth by the feet of generations of your brothers, leads to a stand of oaks known to be particularly generous with their gifts. It's possible these trees were planted and tended, their health carefully monitored to ensure a steady supply of the crucial ingredient you now see. Or perhaps the truth is simpler, and you are just a wanderer, relying on luck and a well-mined strained eye. You walk with your gaze tilted upwards, scanning the lower branches of the great oaks. You are not looking for acorns, nor for any kind of fruit. You are looking for something that looks like a mistake, a strange aberration on the tree. You are searching for oak galls, or as they are sometimes called, oak apples. This is the heart of your ink, the absolute foundation upon which all else is built. You know from the teachings of your elders that these are not fruits. They are a kind of miracle of response. A tiny creature, a girl was, lays a single egg in the living tissue of an oak twig. In reaction, the tree, like an oyster forming a pearl around a grain of sand, weaves a new, special growth around the intruder. This growth, this little wooden ball, becomes a nutrient-minus rich home and larder for the developing wasp larva. This is the mainstream scientific understanding now, but for you, it is simply a known fact of nature, a gift provided by God through the union of a mighty tree and a tiny fly. After several minutes, you spot a cluster of them on a low hanging branch. They are pale brown, round, and about the size of a large berry. You reach out and touch one. The surface is hard and woody. This is where your true expertise comes in, a niche skill that separates a master from a novice. You are not just grabbing any gall, you are selecting them with care. You look for a gall that is heavy for its size and has no tiny exit hole. That little hole would mean the wasp has already matured and flown away, and in doing so, has consumed much of the precious chemical richness inside. Those galls are still usable, but they produce a weaker, browner ink, suitable for mundane records or practice, not for the book of songs. The one you hold is perfect, no hole. You gently twist it, and it comes away from the twig with a satisfying little snap. You drop it into the small leather pouch tied to your belt. It makes a pleasant, solid clinking sound. You find another, then another. You work slowly and methodically, scanning, inspecting, and selecting only the best. It's a meditative task that empties your mind of everything but the search. There is only the feel of the rough bark, the cool weight of the galls in your hand, and the damp, earthy smell of the woods. You are not just a scribe. In this moment, you are a forager, a chemist, a vital link in a chain of production that begins with a wasp's egg. You don't need many. A dozen or so of these high quality galls will produce enough ink to last you for weeks. Your order values frugality. You take only what you need. Once the pouch feels suitably heavy, you pause and look back the way you came. The light filtering through the canopy has softened further, a sign that the afternoon is waning. Your work out here is done, but the process of turning these hard, woody spheres into a fluid, permanent black has only just begun. You turn your back on the silent forest and begin the walk back to the monastery. The weight of your small harvest a comforting promise against your hip. Back within the stone embrace of the monastery, you don't return to the scriptorium. Not yet. Your path takes you to a smaller, less visited room near the kitchens, a place known simply as the pigmentum. It's a workshop, but it feels more like an alchemist's laboratory. The air here carries a different scent profile, a sharp, medicinal tang of vinegar, the earthy smell of dried herbs, and a faint, metallic coppery note that hangs in the air. This is where the raw materials of the earth are coaxed into becoming the vibrant colors and permanent lines that will fill the pages of your holy books. You empty your leather pouch onto a smooth, grey flagstone slab that serves as your work surface. The dozen or so oak galls roll out, clattering softly against the stone. They seem so mundane, these hard little balls of wood. A stranger might dismiss them as debris, something to be swept into the fire. But you see them for what they are, caskets of potential. You know that within each of these unassuming spheres lies a powerful, invisible magic, waiting to be unlocked. Your task is to understand and harness that magic. So, what is it that makes these galls so special? This is the core of the ink maker's art, a piece of mainstream historical and chemical fact. The galls are saturated with a remarkable substance. You don't have a name for it like gallotinic acid, as scholars a millennium from now will. To you, it is simply the virtus, the virtue or power of Theo. It's the same powerful essence that makes unrippy slow pucker your mouth or gives cheap, young wine its harsh bite. It's a spirit of bitterness and preservation. You know its effects from other parts of monastic life. You know that the very same power, extracted from oak bark, is used in the tanning pits to transform a raw, rotting animal hide into strong, supple, enduring leather. The power that stops flesh from decaying is the same power that will make your words immortal. You pick up one of the galls. It feels light but solid. Using a small mallet, You give it a sharp tap. It cracks open, revealing a spongy, fibrous interior. You bring the broken pieces to your nose. It has a faint, sharp, slightly acidic smell. This is where a little minus known piece of tradecraft, a quirky bit of quality control, might come in to truly test the potency of a batch of galls. An experienced ink minus maker might break a small piece off and touch it to his tongue. The effect would be immediate and dramatic and intense. Powerful astringency that dries out the entire mouth in an instant. A bitterness so profound it feels like a physical force. The stronger the pucker, the more potent the gall, and the blacker the resulting ink. It is a sensory test, a direct communion with the raw ingredient. The substance causing this reaction is, of course, tannin, and oak galls are one of the most concentrated natural sources of it on the planet. When the gall wasp triggers the tree to create this special little chamber, the tree pumps it full of these defensive chemicals. It's meant to deter animals from eating it and to prevent fungus and bacteria from setting in. You are, in essence, hijacking a tree's sophisticated defense system for your own purposes. You are taking its power to resist decay and giving it to the written word. How you think about this process is a subject of great fascination and debate for future historians. They will argue about the medieval mind. Were you a scientist, observing cause and effect, understanding that one ingredient reacts with another? Or were you a practitioner of natural magic, following a sacred recipe whose rules were inviolable, a ritual passed down from the elders? The truth, for you, is likely somewhere in the middle, a place where science and faith are not separate things. You don't think in terms of molecules and chemical bonds. You think of it as coaxing a spirit from the wood. You are following a set of holy instructions, steps that you know work because they have always worked. The process is repeatable, yes, but it still feels like a miracle every single time. It is a partnership with God's creation, not a domination of it. You are not alone in this knowledge. The use of oak galls for making dyes and inks is an ancient art. Pliny the Elder wrote about it in Rome centuries ago, but he ran Ireland, isolated and meticulous. The craft has been refined to a high art. You know that the galls from your Irish oaks are good, but you have heard tales from traveling brothers of the legendary galls from the east, from Aleppo, which are said to be so potent they produce an ink of unparalleled blackness. For now, though, you make do with what God has provided in your own forest. You look at the broken gall in your hand. The first step of the transformation is complete the harvest. Now, you must break them all down, reducing them from their solid, individual forms into a coarse powder, preparing them to give up their bitter, preserving spirit when you finally add water. Your small stone slab and your heavy wooden mallet are ready. The work is slow and dusty, but it is the necessary next step in this quiet, meticulous art. The journey from tree to text has truly begun. You've gathered the first soul of the ink, the bitter, preserving spirit of the oak, which now lies on your stone slab. But this spirit, on its own, is incomplete. If you were to crush these galls and soak them in water, the resulting liquid would be a pale, yellowish minus brown tea. It has power, yes, the power of astringency and preservation, but it has no voice. It has no darkness. To give it the profound blackness it needs, you must find its partner, its opposite. You need the second soul of the ink, the soul of iron. This is the central mystery, the alchemical marriage at the heart of your craft. You understand it not through chemical formulas, but through observed truth, a doctrine of creation. The spirit of the gall is acidic and sharp. The spirit of iron is metallic and dark. When they are brought together in the blessed medium of water, they undergo a transformation. They don't just mix, they react, they embrace, they become something new and far greater than the sum of their parts. This reaction is what creates the deep, insoluble black that will bind word to page. Your job now is to find that second soul. You have choices, and your decision depends on availability, patience, and the specific quality of ink you desire to make. The most common and reliable source is right here within the monastery walls. You could walk over to the forge, where Brother Fergal, a man whose arms are as thick as young tree trunks, spends his days creating the music of hammer and fire. The forge is a treasure trove of your key ingredient, though it might not look like it. In a dusty corner, there is always a pile of discarded iron bent nails, broken links from a chain, a cracked horseshoe, shavings swept from the floor. To an outsider, it's rubbish. To you, it's a mine. The key is rust. The newer, shinier pieces of iron are of little use to you. Their spirit is locked away, dormant within the hard metal. You seek out the old, the neglected, the pieces that have been left out in the rain and have begun to weep that familiar reddish minus brown dust. This rust, this robigal, is the iron beginning to release its essence into the world. You know that if you take a handful of these rusty nails and let them steep in rainwater or, even better, in sour wine or vinegar, they will slowly bleed their power into the liquid, creating the magical solution you need. The mainstream knowledge of your time calls this solution vitriol or copperas. You might obtain it in a more refined, crystalline form from a traveling merchant, a precious salt that looks like pale green glass. But making it yourself from scrap iron is the frugal and common way. It is an act of humble recycling that turns waste into a vessel for the divine word. However, today the scrap pile at the forge is low. Father Fergal has been busy, and his corner is unusually tidy. And besides, you remember that the last batch of ink made with the nail minus and minus vinegar method produced a slightly greyish black, not the deep, velvety black you need for the psalms. So you decide on the other path, a path that leads you back outside the monastery walls, but not to the forest this time. Your destination is the bog. Historians and archaeo-minus chemists of the future will debate this very point. When they analyze a drop of ink from your finished manuscript, they can confirm the presence of iron, but its exact origin is a far murkier question. Did the scribe use refined vitriol crystals traded from afar, signaling a link to broader European commerce, or did he use the domestic method of olive nails, pointing to a self-minus sufficient, resourceful community, or did he, perhaps, rely on a unique local resource that would leave a distinct chemical fingerprint? This is where the story of your monastery ink could become entirely unique. You pull your cowl up again and head out, taking a different path this time, one that leads downhill towards the marshy lowlands. The air changes as you descend. It becomes heavier, thicker, smelling of wet peat and decaying vegetation. This is the bog, a place many locals avoid, seeing it as desolate and treacherous. To you, it is another kind of workshop. The ground becomes a soft, springy mattress of sagan moss, and dark, still water pools in hollows, reflecting the grey sky like polished obsidian. You walk carefully, your eyes scanning the ground where the peat has broken away, exposing the earth beneath. You are looking for a specific type of stone. It doesn't look like a stone. Not really. It is a lumpy, reddish minus brown, and surprisingly lightweight conglomerate. This is bog iron. It is a strange and wonderful thing, a quirky gift of the landscape. Over untold years, rainwater washing through the iron minus, rich soil of the surrounding hills carries dissolved iron particles down into the bog. Here, in the acidic, low minus oxygen environment, chemical reactions and possibly even iron minus loving bacteria cause the iron to precipitate out of the water, forming these impure, earthy nodules. You find a good deposit near the roots of a skeletal minus looking birch tree. You use a small, flat stick to pry a few pieces from the wet peat. They feel cool and gritty in your hand. This is a far less predictable source than the nails. Some batches of bulk iron are incredibly potent, others are weak. It all depends on the secret chemistry of the soil. But you have a good feeling about this spot. The reddish color is deep. The texture feels right. It is a wilder, more elemental source. The iron here feels like it's still connected to the living earth. You gather a few lumps, enough to fill your pouch, the very same pouch that earlier held the galls. The two souls of your ink, one from the high branches of the oak, the other from the low, wet heart of the bog, are ready to be brought together. You return to the pigment tongue, the workshop, with the clumpy, rust minus colored bog iron in your pail. You carefully lay the pieces on the stone slab, next to the crushed fragments of the oak galls. The two souls of the ink are now assembled, one born of a tree's high branches, the other from the deep, wet earth. They lie side minus by minus side, waiting, but even together, they are not enough. If you were to combine them now in water, you would achieve the magical transformation to black, but the resulting liquid would be thin and unruly. It would be a dye, not an ink. It would so kind to the vellum like water into a sponge, the edges of your letters blurring into indistinct fuzz. The mixture lacks a corpus, a body. It needs a third element, a gentle mediator to hold the other two in suspension and give them the perfect, flowing consistency. You turn to a small, dusty shelf in the corner, a place reserved for the most precious and exotic of your materials. Here you keep things that did not come from your local for a store-bought, but from the vast, almost mythical world beyond the shores of Ireland. You reach for a small, lidded clay pot. Lifting the lid, you reveal its contents several irregular, amber-minus-colored lumps of hardened resin. They look like pale, dirty jewels or pieces of hardened honey. This is the third soul of your ink, and it is in many ways the most miraculous of all. This is gum arabic. The function of this substance is a cornerstone of historical artistry, a mainstream fact known to every craftsman of your time. This humble gum is the great stabilizer. When dissolved in water, it creates a thick, syrupy liquid. You will add this to your ink at the end of the process. Its purpose is threefold. First, it increases the viscosity of the ink, making it thick enough to cling to the nib of your ink, while but fluid enough to flow smoothly onto the page in a controlled, elegant line. Second, it acts as a binder, helping the black pigment particles adhere to the surface of the vellum rather than sinking too deeply into it. And third, when it dries, it imparts almost imperceptible sheen to the ink, which makes the black appear deeper and richer. It is the ingredient that transforms a simple chemical reaction into a functional, beautiful writing fluid. But here is the truly strange and wonderful thing about these little amber pebbles, a small fact that makes them feel like treasures. You pick one up. It is light and hard. You know that it is the dried sap of a tree, just as resin bleeds from the pine trees in your own woods. But this is not from a pine. This comes from the acacia tree, a thorny, scrubby plant that grows in the hot, sun-scorched lands far to the south and east, places like Egypt and Arabia, lands you know only from the scriptures and the tales of the very few, very brave traveling brothers who have ever seen them. This brings you to a question that even the most learned historians 1,000 years from now will still be debating. How did this piece of Africa end up in your windswept corner of Ireland? You hold in your hand the end point of an immense and shadowy supply chain that stretched across the known world. The journey of this single lump of gum is a silent epic. Imagine it a nomad in a sun-baked land scrapes the sap from an acacia tree. It is sold at a local market, then bundled onto the back of a camel. It travels in a caravan across deserts to a bustling Mediterranean port like Alexandria. There, a Greek or Syrian merchant sells it to a ship's captain, who packs it in his hold alongside spices, silks, and wine. The ship sails across the Great Sea, braving pirates and storms, to a port in Gaul or Spain. From there, it is traded again, moving northward from hand to hand, market to market, until finally a hardy merchant, sailing the wild Irish Sea, brings a small, precious sack of it to a town not far from your monastery, where your abbot purchases it with silver coins or a trade of fine wool. The very existence of this gum in your workshop is a testament to the fact that your world is not nearly as dark or disconnected as it is sometimes imagined to be. It's a complex network of trust, trade, and travel. Scholars will argue about the specifics where these well-miners established formal trade routes or a more haphazard, piecemeal system of exchange. Did the church itself act as a distribution network, with major continental abbeys importing goods and then trading them to smaller houses like yours? There are no shipping manifests or customs receipts for you to consult. All you know is that, somehow, through a chain of countless hands and across thousands of miles, this piece of a sun-baked world has found its way to your cool, damp one, all for the purpose of making your ink perfect. You take a small lump of the gum and place it in your stone mortar. With the pestle, you gently tap it. It doesn't crush like a stone. It shatters with a clean, glassy snap into smaller, glittering crystals. You sweep these into a clean bowl and pour a little warm water over them. Now, you must wait once more. Over the next few hours, the hard crystals will slowly dissolve, transforming the clear water into a thick, sticky, golden liquid. The body of the ink is being prepared. You now have the three core elements, the three souls, assembled, but there is one final, deceptively simple ingredient to consider, the one that will bring them all together, the water itself. The water, it seems like the simplest, most humble component of all, yet it is the vessel in which the entire miracle of transformation will take place. It is the stage upon which the three souls, the gall, the iron, and the gum will perform their chemical dance. And just like any good stage manager, you know that the quality of the stage itself can affect the entire performance. Not all water is created equal. Your choice of water is a subtle but crucial decision in the ink-making process, a piece of practical chemistry learned through generations of trial and error. You walk to the door of the pigmentum and look out into the monastery courtyard. Your most immediate and obvious source is the well, which sits in the center of the garden. The well water is cold, clear, and refreshing to drink. It is a symbol of life and purity for the monastery. However, you know from experience that for making ink, it is not ideal. This is the mainstream, practical knowledge of your craft. Well water, having filtered down through earth and rock, is often hard. You don't know the term calcium carbonate or understand mineral content, but you know its effects. Hard water has a spirit of its own, a mineral spirit that can interfere with the delicate reaction between the gall and the iron. It can dull the blackness of the ink or, worse, cause sediments to form, making the final product gritty and unusable. It's too full of the earth. So you bypass the well and walk towards the edge of the monastery grounds, carrying a clean wooden bucket. You are heading for the large cistern situated at the corner of the main hall, positioned to catch the runoff from the vast slate roof. You are seeking rainwater. Rainwater is soft. It is pure, having come directly from the heavens, with no earthly minerals to corrupt it. This is your preferred medium. It is gentle and receptive, the perfect neutral ground for the potent spirits of the gall and iron to meet and mingle. You ladle some of the collected rainwater into your bucket. It is cool and has a clean, slightly sweet smell. This is the water you will use to steep the crushed galls, to coax their tonic acid out. However, there is another option, another type of water you might use for a different part of the process. This is a bit of quirky, advanced level ink making lore. You might use a more aggressive liquid to prepare the iron. While steeping the bog iron or old nails in simple rainwater will eventually work, the process can be slow. To hasten it, to really tear the iron spirit from its metallic prison, you need something with a bite. You could return to the kitchens and ask the cook for a splash of sour wine or vinegar. The acidity in these liquids attacks the iron more vigorously, creating a more potent iron solution in less time. There's even a more unusual, and frankly less pleasant, option that some ink making recipes from your time mention. It's a bit of a strange historical fact that isn't often discussed in polite company. Some ink recipes call for using stale urine. Its high ammonia and uric acid content make it a powerful solvent, excellent for extracting the iron. It's a testament to the pragmatism of the era. Nothing was wasted, and effectiveness often trumped pleasantness. For you, today, the thought is unappealing. You have time, and the Psalms deserve a purer creation. You will stick with rainwater for the galls and perhaps a touch of vinegar for the iron if it proves stubborn. This question of water and its various additives is another area where modern historians find themselves in deep debate. When they analyze the chemical residue on a medieval manuscript, they can detect the primary ingredient iron, tonic acid, gomarabate, but tracing the subtle chemical markers left by the water source or the specific acidic solvent used is far more difficult. It's a kind of dark matter of ink analysis. Did this scribe use rainwater, spring water, or river water? Did he use wine, vinegar, or something else entirely to leach his iron? Each choice would leave a faint, almost invisible fingerprint on the final product. a tiny clue to the specific environment and resources of the monastery that created it. The arguments over these details are ongoing, as scholars try to build a more complete picture of your daily work. You carry your bucket of clean, soft rainwater back to the workshop. It feels like you've collected the final, essential piece of the puzzle. You have the astringent soul from the oak, the dark soul from the bug iron, the binding soul from the African acacia tree, and now the pure, receptive vessel of water from the sky. All the actors are present. You set the bucket down, and the quiet, patient work of combining them is about to begin. You feel a sense of calm focus settle over you. This is the part of the process you love most, not the foraging, but the slow, deliberate craft of transformation, a skill that feels like a form of prayer in itself. You pour some of the rainwater into a clay pot and add the crushed gold fragments. You will leave this to steep for several days, letting the water slowly become saturated with the tannic acid. You do the same with the bog iron in a separate pot, adding a splash of vinegar to get the process started. Now, all you can do is wait. The monastery bells ring in the distance, calling you to evening prayer. You give one last look at your nascent ink, to pots of murky liquid sitting silently on the stone slab, and head back into the rhythm of monastic life, carrying the quiet anticipation of the magic to come. Several days pass. The rhythms of monastic life, prayer, meager meals, chants that fill the stone chapel, and your own long hours in the scriptorium have pulled you along in their steady, timeless current. But your mind is never far from the two clay pots sitting silently in the cool of the pigmentum. You have been patient. Now, it is time to check on their progress. You slip away from your duties and return to the workshop. The air inside is thick with the smell of transformation. The pot containing the crushed oak goals now holds a liquid the color of dark, strong tea, a deep and brooding reddish minus brown. It smells intensely bitter and acidic. The other pot, the one with the bog iron and vinegar, minus laced rainwater, is less dramatic but equally important. The water is stained a rusty orange, and a fine, dark sludge has settled at the bottom. The spirits of the oak and the iron are awake and ready. Looking at the steeped goals reminds you of the labor it took to get them to this point, a physical exertion that feels a world away from the delicate focus of writing. Before you could leave the goals to the patient work of time, there was the demanding work of your own hands. The memory is fresh in your muscles. You had taken the small, hard spheres and placed them, a few at a time, into your mortar. It's a heavy, bull-minus-shaped block of soapstone, its interior worn smooth and concave from generations of use by your brothers. The pestle is a thick, club-minus-like stone, cool and solid in your hand. This set of tools is ancient, a piece of technology that has remained unchanged for thousands of years. This is a mainstream historical reality. The mortar and pestle you use are functionally identical to those used by Roman apothecaries and Egyptian perfume makers. It's a direct, physical link to the craftsmen of old. First, you used a small wooden mallet to give each goal a sharp crack, breaking its perfect sphere. Then, the fragments went into the mortar, and then the work began. It's a rhythmic, circular motion press. Grind, scrape, turn, press, grind, scrape, turn. At first, the sound is a sharp crunching as the larger pieces break down. Slowly, this gives way to a continuous, gritty whisper as the fragments are reduced to a coarse powder. It is not easy work. The pestle is heavy, and after a few minutes, a dull ache begins in your forearm, spreading to your shoulder and back. The fine, brownish dust rises in a small cloud, and you can taste its bitterness in the back of your throat. This is where you must be disciplined. It is tempting to rush, to use brute force, but that is inefficient and tiring. You must find a steady rhythm, letting the weight of the pestle do most of the work. Your body falling into a swaying motion that is almost like a chant. In this repetitive action, your mind can drift. It becomes a form of meditation, a physical prayer. Each rotation of the pestle is an act of intention, a focused effort towards the creation of something beautiful and enduring. Here, in the simple act of grinding, there's a quirky little detail of the craft. As you crush the goals, you would have noticed the small, fibrous larval chamber at the center of each one. What did you do with it? Some ink minus making traditions, particularly those focused on absolute purity, might have called for you to painstakingly pick out this central chamber, discarding it as an impurity. But the more common, pragmatic approach, likely the one you follow, is to crush the entire thing, woody exterior, spongy interior, larval chamber and all. The belief is that the entire goal, the whole miraculous creation, contains the virtus. Every part of it contributes to the final potency of the ink. And how fine must the powder be? This is a question historians still debate, for the recipes are often silent on such practical specifics. Did you toil for hours, reducing the galls to a powder as fine as flour? This would create a greater surface area, allowing the water to leach the tannins out more quickly and completely. Or did you settle for a coarser grind, something like sand or grit, knowing that a few extra days of steeping would achieve the same result with far less effort? It's a classic trade minus off of labor versus time. The answer likely depended on your patience, your strength, and the urgency of your need for new ink. Your aching shoulder from the memory suggests you aimed for a thorough, if not exhaustive, grind. You dip a clean stick into the pot of steeped gold liquid. The color is rich and deep. You do the same with the iron solution. It feels ready. The physical breaking down is done. The patient steeping is complete. You have successfully drawn the two essential spirits from their earthly prisons and suspended them in the pure vessel of rainwater. Now, the quiet, observational part of the process is about to give way to the next phase, one that requires even more patience and a watchful eye. It is time to let these two liquids begin the slow, strange process of fermenting, a controlled decay that will further unlock their power before the final, magical moment of combination. Now begins the test of a scribe's true patience. It's a phase of the process that has no sound, no visible action, only the slow, silent work of nature happening within your clay pots. This is the fermentation, and it is the most mysterious and least understood part of your craft. You move the two pots, one containing the dark tea of the steeped galls, the other the rusty solution of bog iron, to a corner of the pigmentum where they will be undisturbed. You cover them loosely with wooden lids, not to seal them, but to keep out the dust and curious insects. And then you wait. This waiting is an act of faith. You will let these liquids sit for days, perhaps even weeks. There is no set schedule, no timer to tell you when they are ready. You must rely on your senses and the wisdom passed down to you. Each day, you will come to the workshop, lift the lids, and observe. You are watching for subtle signs of life, of a quiet, unseen transformation taking place. This is a mainstream historical step in many traditional ink recipes, but the why of it was a matter of practical magic rather than scientific understanding. You know that this period of rotting, as some might crudely call it, is essential. It improves the final product, deepening the color and ensuring its permanence. You are essentially allowing microorganisms from the air, wild yeasts and bacteria, to colonize the liquid. In the pot of gall solution, these tiny, invisible helpers begin to break down the complex gallotinic acid into simpler, more reactive forms, like gallic acid. You wouldn't know those terms. Of course, for you, the liquid is ripening or maturing, like a good cheese or a strong ale. You'll notice a faint, sour smell developing, and perhaps a thin film, a bloom of yeast, forming on the surface. These are good signs. It tells you the spirit of the oak is becoming more potent, more refined. The pot with the iron solution is also undergoing a quiet evolution. The bacteria and the acidic environment are working together to further break down the iron oxides, making the iron more available to bond with the tannins when the time comes. This period of fermentation is a slow, controlled decay that paradoxically makes the final ink less susceptible to decay. You are fighting fire with fire, using the forces of decomposition to create something that will resist decomposition for 1,000 years. Here is where a truly strange and somewhat disgusting detail of medieval craft comes into play. It's a quirky bit of lore that highlights the unglamorous reality of your work. How did you encourage this fermentation to begin? Sometimes it would happen on its own, given enough time, but to kickstart the process and ensure the right kind of microbial activity, An ink minus, maker, white add a starter. And what was a common starter? A splash of stale ale, a crust of bread, or even, and it's best to hold your breath for this one, spittle. Yes, spitting into the mixture was a known technique. Your saliva is rich in enzymes that would begin breaking down starches and proteins, creating a welcoming environment for the desired yeasts and bacteria. It sounds crude to a modern ear, but to you, it is a practical application of the tools at hand. The human body itself becomes an ingredient in the creation of holy text. The exact duration of this fermentation is one of the great depends of history, a question that scholars of technology still puzzle over. Medieval recipes are maddeningly vague on this point. They use phrases like "let it stand until it is ready" or "wait for 3 Sundays." This wasn't laziness. It was an acknowledgement that this was an art, not a science. The ideal fermentation time would depend entirely on the ambient temperature of your workshop. In the warmth of a rare Irish summer, the process might take only a few days. In the damp chill of winter, with the stone walls radiating cold, it could take a month or more. You can't follow a calendar. You have to read the signs. You have to learn the personality of your own workspace. So you watch, you wait, and you learn. Every day, you check the pots. You see the color of the gall liquid deepen from a reddish minus brown to an almost opaque, syrupy black minus brown. You see the iron solution clarify slightly as the heavier particles settle. You smell the change, from the sharp scent of vinegar and rust to something deeper, more complex, and vaguely sour. You are not idle during this time. Of course, the monastery's rhythm continues. You spend your days in the scriptorium, carefully ruling the lines on fresh sheets of vellum, sharpening your quills, and perhaps using the dregs of your old ink on less critical tasks. But a part of your mind is always in the pigmentum, waiting for the moment when the two souls, now properly matured and prepared, are finally ready to be united. This period of quiet observation is the ultimate exercise in monastic virtue, patience, observation, and faith in a process you do not fully understand but have learned to trust implicitly. It's the slow, deep breath before the moment of creation. The waiting is over. You can feel it. It's a sense born not of measurement, but of intuition, honed by experience and the teachings of your predecessors. You stand in the pigmentum before your 2 clay pots. The gall solution is now dark and fragrant with a sharp, vinegary scent. The iron liquid has a distinctively metallic tang in the air. The spirits have been prepared, mature, and are now ready for the moment of their union. This is the part of the process that never fails to fill you with a sense of wonder. It's a moment of quiet, instantaneous magic, a transformation you can witness with your own eyes. First, you must purify your liquids. Using a clean piece of woolen cloth, you carefully strain the gall solution into a new, larger clay pot. This removes the spent fragments of the galls and any surface scum that may have formed during fermentation. The resulting liquid is a clear but deeply colored brownish minus red, like a dark sherry. You do the same for the iron solution, straining it to remove the sludge and any unminus dissolved bits of bog iron. What's left is a paler, slightly rusty minus looking liquid. These are your 2 purified essences. Now, for the miracle. This is the absolute core of the chemistry, the mainstream knowledge that defines this entire category of ink. When the tannic and gallic acids from the oak galls mix with the iron sulfate solution you've created, an immediate chemical reaction occurs. The iron and the tannin molecules bind to each other, forming a new compound, ferrous-tannate. This new compound is soluble in water, but it has a remarkable property: it's intensely, profoundly dark. You take the pot of strained iron solution. There is a sense of ceremony in your movements. You are steady and deliberate. You begin to pour the pale, rusty liquid in a slow, thin stream into the larger pot containing the dark, reddish minus brown gall solution. And it happens. The very instant the 2 liquids touch, the world changes. Where the stream of iron solution meets the gall tea, a bloom of absolute blackness erupts. It's not a slow darkening. It is an instantaneous, shocking transformation. With every drop you add, swirling clouds of pure black ink blossom and expand through the brownish liquid. like a drop of night falling into water. It's a startlingly beautiful effect, a silent explosion of darkness. You continue to pour, stirring gently with a clean wooden stick. Within moments, the entire pot has changed. What was once two distinct, colored liquids is now a single, unified substance, a thin, watery, but unmistakably black ink. You hold the pot up to the light of the narrow window. It doesn't look completely black yet. In fact, this initial creation is a bit of a quirky and often misunderstood aspect of fresh iron gall ink. The initial color is often a pale, grayish minus black, or even a bluish minus black. It lacks the deep, velvety richness you see in a finished manuscript. This is because the true magic of this ink is a 2- step process. The first reaction, the one you just witnessed, creates the initial color. The second, and more important, reaction happens slowly, over time, in contact with the air. As the ink dries on the page, the ferrous tannate oxidizes, turning into ferritinate. This oxidized form is not only a much deeper, more intense black, but it is also no longer soluble in water, which is what gives the ink its incredible permanence. This is a point of academic fascination. Historians and conservators who study manuscripts can sometimes see evidence of this 2- stage process. They might find notes in the margins of a medieval text written in a faded, ghostly brown, perhaps ink from a batch that was improperly made, lacking enough iron to fully oxidize. Conversely, they might analyze the perfectly black letters of your psalm book and understand that the scribe knew the secret. The secret is that the ink's true, final color doesn't fully reveal itself in the pot, but on the page. You have to trust that the pale gray you've just created will, with the help of the air itself, mature into the perfect black you desire. There is, however, an ongoing debate about this. Did scribes like you always work with this pale grain, trusting in the chemistry, or were there tricks to deepen the color from the very beginning? Some ancient recipes call for boiling the ink after it's mixed, which could concentrate the solution and darken the initial color. Others suggest adding a colorant right at the end, a pinch of soot from a lamp. For example, this wouldn't affect the ink's permanence, but it would add an immediate visual boost, making the ink appear black and satisfying right out of the pot. This would have made the act of writing much easier, as the pale grey ink could be difficult to see against the creamy vellum, especially in the dim light of the scriptorium. It's a practical consideration that scholars still argue about. Did you add a pinch of salt for convenience, or did you work with the pure, unadulterated formula, trusting in the slow miracle of oxidation? Looking at the thin, grayish minus black liquid in your pot, you know it is still incomplete. It is a soul with no body. It has the color, but not the substance, the final act of creation, the step that will turn this watery dye into a true, workable ink, still awaits. The blackness has been born, but it is a wild, untamed spirit. The liquid in your pot is thin, almost like water. If you were to dip your quill in it now, it would run off the nib in a messy blob, and the moment it touched the vellum, it would spread and bleed, creating a feathery, indistinct stain rather than a crisp line. The transformation is not yet complete. You have the color, but you need control. You need to give the ink its body, to thicken its consistency until it is as obedient to your hand as a well-trained dog. It is time to introduce the third soul, the gentle, mediating spirit of the gum arabic. You turn to the bowl where you left the glassy lumps of acacia resin to dissolve. Over the past few days, they have melted away into the rainwater, creating a thick, sticky, golden colored syrup. It has the consistency of honey, clinging to the wooden stick you dip into it. This is your binder and your thickener, the ingredient that will give your ink the perfect flow and substance. This is a mainstream principle of any kind of paint or ink production. Ancient or modern, you need a pigment, your iron gall complex, and a binder or vehicle to carry it. Your syrupy gum arabic is the perfect vehicle. Now you must act like a master chef, or perhaps an apothecary, adding the final ingredient with care and precision. This is not a process of simply dumping one pot into another. The balance must be perfect. Too little gum, and the ink will remain too thin, producing watery, weak looking letters. Too much gum, and the ink will become thick and syrupy, refusing to flow from the quill. It might even be so thick that, when it dries, it flakes off the page over time, taking the holy words with it. This is a delicate art, guided by feel rather than by exact measurement. You take your pot of thin, grayish minus black ink and begin to add the dissolved gum arabic. 1 spoonful at a time. You pour it in slowly, stirring constantly with your wooden stick. With each addition, you can feel the change. The resistance against the stirring stick increases slightly. The liquid becomes heavier, more substantial. After adding a spoonful, you pause. You lift the stick out of the pot and watch how the ink drips from its end. Does it run off in a quick stream? Still too thin? Does it cling in a thick, slow minus moving glob? Too thick? You're looking for a specific quality adrift that is deliberate, but not sluggish. A liquid that coats the stick in a thin, even film. This is where a quirky and rather charming little trade secret comes in. It's a trick of the trade that you wouldn't find in any formal recipe, but would learn from watching an old master. To test the viscosity, you might dip the tip of your finger into the ink. Then, you would touch your thumb and finger together and slowly draw them apart. You're looking at a thread of ink that forms between them. Is it a fine, delicate thread that stretches for an inch before snapping cleanly? That is the sign of a near minus perfect consistency. It shows that the ink has enough body to hold together, but enough fluidity to break away without being stringy or messy. It is a tactile, intuitive test that connects you intimately with the substance you are creating. The debate among modern scholars here recent about if a binder was used the chemical evidence of gum arabic in surviving manuscripts is clear. The debate is about the purity and source of that binder. You are using high minus quality gum from an acacia tree, an expensive import. But what if the monastery was poor, or trade routes were disrupted? Did scribes resort to local alternatives? Historical analysis and experimental archaeology suggest they might have. They could have used cherry gum, or the resin from plum trees, which have similar properties though are generally considered inferior. Some have even proposed that they could have made a binder from boiling down scraps of vellum or parchment to create a kind of gelatin, or even use stag white GLA. Each of these alternatives would have given the ink a slightly different character, a different feel under the quill. The choice of binder is another subtle clue that can tell a story about the monastery's wealth and connections. You add another half minus spoonful of the gum syrup. You stir. You perform the drip test, then the finger test. The thread is perfect. It holds, shimmers for a moment, and then snaps. You feel a quiet surge of satisfaction. The ink is complete. It is no longer 3 separate souls in a watery medium, but a single, unified entity. It has the permanence of iron and oak, the body of African gum, and the purity of rainwater. It is dark, it is thick, it is ready. But even a master craftsman trusts, but verifies. The ultimate test is not how it behaves in the pot, but how it behaves on the page. The moment has come for the final trial, the one that truly matters. It is time to take your creation back to the scriptorium, back to your world of vellum and light, and see how it runs. You find a clean, small ceramic pot. Carefully pour your finished ink into it, and carry it, steady minus handed, towards your desk. You carry the small ceramic pot of ink back to your carrel in the scriptorium, as if it were a holy relic. The silence of the room feels different now, charged with anticipation. You place the pot gently into the hole on your desk designed to hold it, its cool weight settling into place. Your world condenses once more to this small circle of light, this slanted desk, this waiting page. The ink is made, but it is nothing without the hand that wields it and the pen that gives it a voice. Before you can test your new creation, you must attend to your pen. Your pen, of course, is a quill. This is the mainstream, fundamental to love every scribe in your world. You reach into a simple wooden box and select a primary flight feather from a goose. Its shaft thick and strong. You might have a few from a swan for larger, more formal script, or even a crow's feather for exceptionally fine, detailed work. But the goose quill is your reliable workhorse. It's light, flexible, and holds a good amount of ink. But you cannot simply write with a raw feather. It must be prepared, a delicate craft in its own right. First, the feather must be hardened or tempered. You would have done this earlier by plunging the shaft into a pan of hops and for a few moments. This process drives out the natural oils and makes the barrel harder and more durable, less likely to split. Now, you pick up your pen minus knife, a small razor minus sharp blade. This knife is not for cutting vellum. It is used for one purpose, only shaping and maintaining your quills. With practiced, precise movements, you carve the tip of the quill barrel into a broad, sharp point. You make a small, vertical slit down the center of this new nib. This is the most crucial cut. This tiny slit acts as a reservoir, allowing the ink to flow from the main barrel down to the tip in a controlled, steady manner. The width and angle of the nib you cut will determine the character of your script. A broad nib creates the strong, contrasting thick and thin strokes of the insular majuscule script you are copying. You are not just a writer. You are a precision tool minus maker, constantly shaping and minus sharpening your instrument as you work. Now for the test itself. You would never, ever risk this first trial on the pristine, ruled page of the songbook waiting before you. That would be an act of profound foolishness. Instead, you reach for a piece of scrap vellum, a Schedule A. This is an off-minus cut, perhaps a piece trimmed from the edge of a larger hide, full of imperfections. Its surface is covered in other test marks, a few practice letters, a swirl to test the flow of an older batch of ink, perhaps even a tiny, bored doodle of a fish in the corner. This little piece of vellum is a quirky, private diary of your work, a record of trial and error. This is the moment of truth. You take a deep, quiet breath. You dip the newly minus cut tip of your quill into the pot of fresh ink. You don't plunge it in. You touch it to the surface gently, allowing capillary action to draw the ink up into the nib and the tiny slit. You lift it out. A perfect, small droplet of grayish minus black ink clings to the point. You press the nib to the scrap vellum. There is a faint, satisfying scratch, a sound that only you can hear. It is the sound of creation. The vellum, with its slightly abrasive, pounced surface, pulls the ink from the quill, and a line appears. You draw a simple stroke, a short prayer, or more likely, the traditional test phrase known to scribes everywhere: probatio penne. Testing of the pen. The line is clean. It does not bleed. The ink flows smoothly from the quill, not too fast, not too slow. The body you so carefully created with the gum arabic is doing its job perfectly. The color, as you expected, is a pale, watery gray. But you do not panic. You hold the scrap of vellum closer to the light from the window and you watch. And as you watch, the second miracle begins. Over the next minute, as the air touches the wetting, the pale gray line begins to blush with darkness. The oxygen in the air is reacting with the iron in the ink, transforming it, deepening it. The watery gray slowly, magically, ripens into a solid, satisfying black. It is a quiet, private affirmation. Your process was correct. Your instincts were true. The ink is good. Historians and literary scholars still hold a fascinating debate on this topic. What was the scribe's emotional connection to his tools and materials? Did you, sitting here in your cold stone carrel, feel a surge of pride in this successful batch of ink? When a quill cut badly or a batch of ink fed, did you feel a stab of personal frustration? The evidence is tantalizingly scarce, but sometimes, in the margins of great manuscripts, scribes left personal notes: the ink is bad, the vellum is hairy, or the famous lament of one Irish monk: it is cold today. These tiny, human complaints reach across the centuries. They suggest that your relationship with your ink wasn't just practical, it was a partnership. And today, looking at the perfect black line on your test sheet, you feel that your new partner is a good one indeed. The deep, satisfying black that has blossomed on your test scrap is a promise fulfilled. The ink is good. A quiet feeling of relief and professional pride settles over you. But this small victory immediately presents a new challenge. In front of you is the large clay pot containing the bulk of your creation, enough to last you for many months of diligent work. The small pot on your desk is for immediate use, but this larger batch, The fruit of all your foraging and grinding and waiting is now vulnerable. Its enemies are already gathering. The first enemy is the very air that gave the ink its final, beautiful color. The oxygen you relied on for the oxidation on the page is now a threat to the ink in the pot. If left exposed, a thick, rubbery skin will form on the surface, a result of the same chemical reaction you desired, but happening where you don't want it. Eventually, the water will evaporate, and the entire batch will dry into a whole, useless bucket at the bottom of the pot. Your liquid treasure would become a black stone. The second enemy is life itself. Your ink, a rich brew of organic compounds, sugars from the galls, proteins and the gamma, is an attractive feast for the invisible world. In the damp, cool climate of your monastery, mold is a constant, creeping foe. You've seen it happen to poorly stored batches of fine. White or greenish fuzz appears on the surface, smelling musty and sour. This mold doesn't just sit there, it consumes the ink, breaking down the binder and ruining the consistency, turning your perfect writing fluid into a clumpy, foul-smelling mess. So your final task as an ink-maker is not one of creation, but of preservation. This is a mainstream, practical concern for any craftsman. You must protect your hard work. Your primary tool for this is simple a well-made ceramic pot with a tight-fitting lid. You select one from a shelf, inspecting it for any cracks. A good pot, perhaps with a glazed interior, is less porous and offers better protection. You carefully pour the bulk of your ink from the mixing vessel into this storage pot, filling it almost to the brim to minimize the amount of trapped air. You press the lid on firmly. Then, for extra security, you might take a strip of scrap leather, wet it, and tie it tightly around the seam where the lid meets the pot. As the leather dries, it will shrink, creating an even tighter seal. But there is another, more ingenious, and decidedly more unusual method of storage. This is a wonderfully quirky bit of medieval technology, a testament to using every part of an animal for smaller quantities, or for ink that needs to be transported. You might use a pig's bladder. You would have procured one from the brother in charge of the kitchens after a pig was slaughtered. The process is a bit gruesome but highly effective. The bladder would be thoroughly cleaned, flushed with water and salt, then inflated with air, tied off, and left to dry for several days until it becomes a translucent, and surprisingly lightweight container. You would then carefully pour your ink into this bladder through its opening, squeeze out the excess air, and tie the neck off tightly with a strong cord. The result is a perfect, airtight ink pouch. It has a distinct advantage over a rigid pot as you use the ink. The flexible bladder collapses, meaning there is never an air pocket on the surface of the liquid. This drastically reduces the risk of both drying and molding. It's the medieval equivalent of a vacuum-sealed bag, a clever piece of biotechnology that is both practical and portable. A traveling scribe could tuck a few of these into a satchel without fear of breakage or leaks. But, even with the best container, the threat of mold remains. This leads to an area of significant debate among historians and chemical analysts. How exactly did you fight the fuzz? The recipes are often silent on this point, but science and experimentation offer clues. It's likely you added a preservative to the ink during its final stage. A common and effective choice would have been salt. A small amount of salt dissolved in the ink would inhibit microbial growth without significantly affecting the ink's performance. Another possibility is a splash of strong spirit, the fiery aqua vita, the water of life, that your monastery might distill for medicinal purposes. The high alcohol content would kill any lurking spores. Some even suggest that a few drops of clove oil, a precious spice traded from the East, could have been used for its potent anti-fungal properties. Each of these solutions would leave a distinct chemical trace, a tiny fingerprint that a scholar 1,000 years from now might be able to detect, offering a clue to your monastery's specific preservation techniques. Did you make one giant batch of ink to last a whole year, carefully preserving it? Or was it more common to make smaller, more frequent batches, using the ink up before it had a chance to spoil? This is another question scholars ponder. Variations in the chemical makeup of the ink within a single manuscript, like the Book of Chaos, suggest that the scribes were likely making many different batches over the long years of the book's creation. Perhaps the ideal was a large, stable supply, but the reality was a continuous cycle of making and using smaller amounts. For today, your work is done. You placed a large, sealed storage pot in a cool, dark corner of the pigment tun. You have a smaller, filled bladder ready for your next journey, and the pot on your desk is full. Your heart is at ease. The precious black liquid, the physical voice of the holy words you will transcribe. Inside, it is protected from the air and the creeping mold, waiting patiently for your quill. For many days, your world is a symphony of blackened cream. Use it at your desk. The pot of new ink performing beautifully. With your sharpened goose quill, you lay down line after line of dark, crisp letters onto the smooth, pale surface of the vellum. The words of the Psalms emerge under your head, a river of black flowing across the page. The work is steady, meditative, and deeply satisfying. Yet, as you complete another column of dense, perfect script, you pull back and look at the page as a whole. It is uniform. It is legible, but it is visually monotonous. It lacks fire. It lacks a clear voice to announce a new thought, to draw the reader's eye to a moment of importance. A manuscript cannot live on black ink alone. This is a fundamental, mainstream principle of your art. A page of unbroken black text is a dense forest, easy to get lost in, to guide the reader, to create landmarks and pathways through the words. You need color. Specifically, you need red. The act of adding red ink to a text is called rubrication, and it is essential to the function of the book as the black letters themselves. You will use it for titles, for the first letter of a new chapter, the incipit, or sometimes for corrections and important notes in the margin. Red is the clarifying voice, the pointing finger, the spark of light in the darkness. To create this spark, you must return to the pigment tongue. But making red ink is a completely different art from the complex chemistry of your iron gall ink. Black ink is a dye, a chemical transformation. Red ink is a paint. It is composed of a solid, colored substance, a pigment that is ground into a fine powder and then suspended in a liquid binder. Your task is to choose your pigment, and for red, you have two primary choices, representing two very different paths: the path of the earth and the path of fire. The first path is the humble, safe, and cold one. You could open a simple wooden box that contains several lumps of a soft, earthy, reddish minus brown rock. This is red ochre. It is, at its heart, a form of rust, a natural clay rich in iron oxide. You might even find it locally, in deposits not far from where you found your bog iron. It is the color of brick dust, of terracotta pots, of the very soil itself. Its name is tied directly to your work. The Latin word for a red earth like this is rubrica. The very origin of the word rubrication is a wonderfully direct and quirky etymological link. Making ink from it is straightforward. You grind the soft stone into a powder, mix it with your binder, and you have a perfectly serviceable red ink. It is reliable, cheap, and completely safe. But as you look at the page of Psalms you've just finished, you know that this particular section requires something more. It is the beginning of a major song, one that calls for majesty. Ochre is a gentle red, a warm red. You need a red that sings, a red that is loud and brilliant. You need the red of fire, of blood, of a king's robe, and for that, you must turn to the second path, the dangerous path. You walk to the special shelf, the one holding the precious materials from afar, where you keep the gum arabic. Next to it is a small, heavy stone box. You open it carefully. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft wool, is a single, dark red, crystalline stone. It glitters faintly in the dim light. This is cinnabar. It is a mineral of mercury sulfide, and when ground, it produces a red pigment of breathtaking intensity and brilliance called vermilion. This is not the color of earth. This is the color of light itself. It is incredibly expensive, mined in faraway lands like Spain and traded across the continent at great cost. A single lump like this is worth a week's worth of food for the entire monastery. This is where a serious and somber debate continues among future historians. How much did you know about the nature of this beautiful stone? You know that it is precious, but do you know that it is poison? Cinnabar is mercury, a heavy metal that is toxic. The dust from grinding it is dangerous to inhale. Constant contact can lead to sickness of the nerves and mind. Roman authors wrote of the grim fate of the criminals and slaves sent to work in the cinnabar mines. A virtual death sentence. Did that knowledge travel with the pigment itself? The answer is unclear. You might not understand it as poison in a chemical sense, but you likely know it as a baleful or unwholesome substance, one to be treated with immense respect and caution. The choice to use it was likely driven by its unparalleled color and status, with the physical risks being a poorly understood secondary concern. Today, the psalm demands it. You take the lump of cinnabar and place it in your mortar, a different, smaller one you keep just for this purpose, to avoid cross-minus contamination. You begin to grind. The work is even more painstaking than with the galls. You must reduce the crystalline stone to a powder, so impossibly fine that it feels like silk between your fingers. The finer the pigment, the smoother and more brilliant the paint will be. As you work, a faint, reddish dust rises, and you are careful to keep your head turned, to not breathe it in. Once you have a small pile of fiery, scarlet powder, you scrape it into a clean shell or a small pot. Now for the binder. For this, you won't use the honey minus like gum aerobic solution. You need something clear that won't dull the vibrant red. You need GL or egg white. You would have cracked an egg, separated the white, and beaten it into a froth, then let it settle back into a clear, sticky liquid. You add the GL layer to the vermilion powder drop by drop, mixing it with a clean feather until you have a thick, glossy, scarlet paint. You carry the small shell of brilliant red ink back to your desk. You meticulously clean your quill, ensuring no trace of the black ink remains. Then you dip it into the red. You turn to the page, take a breath, and you form the first, large, majestic letter. B for Beatus VIR. Blessed is the man. The vermilion leaps off the page. Against the sea of black and cream, it is a trumpet blast, a declaration. The text is no longer just a record. It is an illuminated space, coming alive with hierarchy and beauty, all thanks to a dangerous and beautiful stone from the far ends of the earth. Your psalm book is now beginning to glow with life. The brilliant vermilion you so carefully prepared stands out like a jewel, announcing each new section with authority. But the desire for color is a powerful one. As you work on a particularly important page, perhaps the opening of the entire book, you decide it needs more than just black and red. It needs the colors of the Irish landscape itself, the rich green of the mossy hills and the elusive blue of a rare, clear summer sky. The page will not just be read, it will be a vision, a window into the beauty of God's creation. This decision takes you back once more to the pigment tongue, but now you are entering into the most experimental and, frankly, the most hazardous corner of your craft. Creating stable greens and blues was one of the greatest challenges for a medieval artist. The pigments were often expensive, difficult to make, or dangerously unstable. Let's start with green, the most immediate. Obvious source of green is all around you, the leaves of the forest. This is a mainstream historical fact for centuries. Artists tried to create green pigments from plants. You could gather iris leaves or buckthorn berries, crush them, and extract their juice. The problem, as you know from frustrating experience, is that these colors are fugitive. They are dyes, not pigments. They might look vibrant and green when first applied, but they fade quickly when exposed to light, turning a sickly yellow minus brown over time. Your holy book must endure for centuries, so a fading green is worse than no green at all. You need a grain with the permanence of stone. This leads you to a process that feels more like aggressive alchemy than gentle craft. You take a sheet of copper, perhaps an old, damaged piece from the monastery's roof. You place it in a lidded earthenware pot. Now, for the corrosive agent, you pour a strong vinegar or, more potently, sour wine into the pot, just enough to cover the bottom, but not enough to touch the copper plate, which you might suspend on small stones. You put the lid on the pot and seal it. What you have created is a miniature toxic chamber. The fumes from the vinegar, the acetic acid, will fill the pot and begin to viciously attack the surface of the copper. You leave the sealed pot for a week or two. When you open it, a strange and beautiful transformation has occurred. The shiny surface of the copper is now covered in a crust of a brilliant, crystalline green minus blue powder. This is verdierix. It is a copper acetate, a pigment known and used since the time of the Romans. You carefully scrape this green crust off the plate. It is a beautiful color, ranging from a deep emerald to a pale turquoise, but it is also deeply treacherous. Here we encounter a truly quirky and dangerous fact about your materials. Verdierix is famously reactive. It is an unstable pigment that can, over time, wreak havoc on a manuscript. Not only can it fade or change color, but the acid within it can remain active. Like a slow minus-acting poison, it can corrode and burn right through the vellum over the centuries, leaving a dark, burned minus out hole where your beautiful green illumination used to be. Many a medieval manuscript bears the scars of this beautiful but destructive green. This destructive nature of verdierix is a topic of intense debate among manuscript conservators. They asked, did scribes like you know about this long minus turn danger? Did you have secret techniques to try and neutralize it? Some recipes suggest mixing the verdierix powder with a lead minus based white pigment or binding it with a heavy, waxy medium to try and insulate it from the vellum. Others think you simply accepted the risk, prioritizing the immediate, stunning visual effect over the potential for long minus term damage that you would never live to see. The truth is, your knowledge was likely a mix of practical experience and hope. You knew it was a difficult color, but its beauty was hard to resist. Feeling the risk of the verdierix is too great for this particular page, you might turn to a safer, if less brilliant, alternative green earth. Like red ochre, this is a natural clay pigment, mined from the grail. It produces a soft, gentle, olive minus green color. It's stable, safe, and reliable, but it lacks the jewel minus-like intensity of the verdierix. And what about blue? Blue was the king of colors, the most expensive and sought minus after pigment of all. For you in 9th minus century Ireland, there is really only one option for high minus quality blue, and it is almost mythical in its rarity. It is not made in your workshop. It comes to you as a finished product, a coarse, dark blue powder in a tightly sealed pouch, purchased at an extravagant cost. This is ultramarine, which means from over the sea, and it truly is. The pigment is made from grinding the semi-minus precious stone lapis lazuli. The only known source for this stone in your time is in a single set of mines in a remote river valley in what will one day be called Afghanistan. The journey of this pigment to your desk is an odyssey even more incredible than that of your gum arabic. It traveled the Silk Road by caravan, was traded through Persia and the Byzantine Empire, and eventually made its way into the hands of European merchants. Its cost was astronomical, often rivaling that of gold. Its use was reserved for only the most sacred of images typically, the robes of the Virgin Mary. To have even a small amount in your monastery is a sign of immense wealth and prestige. You would use it with the utmost economy, binding the precious blue dust with GL errand, applying it with a tiny, fine minus-tipped brush, making every particle count. Your other option for blue would have been from the woad plant, but like other plant colors, it was a dye and prone to fading, unsuitable for the highest minus quality work. You look at your palette of colors, the reliable black, the fiery red, the dangerous green, the impossibly precious blue. You are no longer just a scribe. You are an alchemist, a chemist, and an artist, wrestling with beautiful, but often perilous materials to bring light and life to the sacred page. The days and weeks blend into a steady rhythm of focus work. You are no longer just making materials. You are using them, spending hours upon hours hunched over your slanted desk. The initial excitement of the newly made inks and pigments has settled into the quiet, demanding reality of daily labor, and your body is beginning to protest. The cold that seeps from the stone floor has found a permanent home in your joints. and the long hours of stillness are taking their toll. You are beginning to experience the unique and uncomfortable afflictions of your trade, the quiet martyrdom of the medieval scribe. First, there are your eyes. This is the most mainstream and universally understood complaint of anyone who does close work. The light in the scriptorium is your most precious and fickle resource. You work from the first light of dawn until the last usable rays of dusk. On bright, sunny days, the light streaming through the narrow window can be sharp and clear, but often it is filtered through the perpetual grey clouds of Ireland, making the world a dim, soft-minus focus place. You find yourself leaning closer and closer to the vellum, your nose almost touching the page, squinting to ensure each stroke is perfectly placed. When you finally look up, the world beyond your desk swims in a blurry haze for a moment before snapping back into focus. At night, you close your eyes but can still see the ghost of the page behind your eyelids, your vision tired and strained. You might bathe your eyes with cool water or a solution of rosewater, if the monastery has it, but the relief is only temporary. The next morning, the strain begins anew. Then there is your back. The bench you sit on is hard and unforgiving, with no support. To maintain the precise control needed for your script, you must lean forward, your spine curved into a constant, gentle oath. After a few hours, a dull, persistent take begins in your lower back. It spreads upwards, creating a knot of tension between your shoulder blades. You try to straighten up, to stretch, but the relief is fleeting. The moment you return to your work, the posture returns, and so does the ache. You see the older monks in your order moving stiffly, their backs permanently stooped from a lifetime of this labor. You are, quite literally, bending your body to the will of the word. And of course, there are your hands. Your right hand, the one that grips the quill, there's a landscape of its own unique pains. Your fingers are perpetually locked in a gentle curve. The knuckle of your middle finger, where the quill rests, has developed a permanent, hardened call USA scribe's badge of honor, sometimes called a writer's bump. After a long day of writing, your fingers feel stiff and cramped, a condition you might call writer's cramp. You flex them, rub them, trying to bring life back into them, but the deep minus-seated stiffness remains. This collection of physical ailments, the eye strain, the back pain, the cramped hands, is a well-minus documented part of a scribe's life. But there is a more unusual, a more specific affliction that is a quirky and less minus discussed part of your job. It's the simple, nagging discomfort of being cold. The scriptorium is rarely heated. Fire is the greatest enemy of a library, and the risk of a stray spark destroying centuries of work is too great to bear. So you endure the chill. You wear a thick woolen habit. You might have a heavy cloak wrapped around your legs, but the cold is insidious. Your left hand, the one used to hold the vellum steady, is particularly susceptible. It lies still on the cold page for long periods, and the blood flows slow. You often have to stop and tuck it into your sleeve or armpit, trying to chase away the numbness and bring feeling back to your fingertips. How you and your brothers dealt with these physical realities is a topic of ongoing academic discussion. Historians debate the ergonomics of the medieval scriptorium. Did you have footstools to ease the strain on your legs? Were there different types of desks, some for standing, some for sitting, to allow you to change position? The visual evidence from manuscript illuminations is oft uncontradictory and stylized. Some show scribes in what look like comfortable, purpose-built chairs, while others depict them perched on simple stools in awkward positions. The reality was likely as varied as the monasteries themselves. Perhaps your abbot was forward-thinking and understood the importance of a well-designed workspace. Or perhaps, more likely, the physical discomfort was seen as a form of spiritual discipline, a minor mortification of the flesh to be offered up for the glory of God. You pause your work, setting the quill down carefully. You press the heels of your hands into your tired eyes, seeing a brief explosion of colored light. You roll your shoulders, trying to loosen the knot of tension in your back. You look over at Brother Donnan. He is still bent over his page, a figure of absolute concentration, seemingly immune to the discomforts you feel so acutely. Is he more disciplined, or does he simply hide it better? You will never ask. You take a slow, deep breath, take up your quill, and return to the page. The psalm will not copy itself. The pain is temporary. The word is eternal. That is what you tell yourself, over and over. You've settled into the rhythm. The aches in your back and strain in your eyes have faded into a familiar background hum, a constant companion to your work. The world has shrunk to the tip of your quill. You pull the pen towards you to form the gentle curve of an A, your mind already on the next letter, the next word, and then it happens. A moment of lapsed concentration, a tiny, involuntary twitch in your tired fingers. The quill nib catches on the vellum just for a fraction of a second, and the ink pools slightly, making the letter too thick, too clumsy. It's a tiny flaw, one that an untrained eye might never notice. But to you, it screams from the page. It is a discordant note in a perfect symphony. Your heart doesn't exactly plummet your earmug, after all, and dramatic panic is frowned upon, but it certainly sinks into the cold pit of your stomach. A mistake. You have marred a page of the Holy Scriptures. Your breath catches in your throat. This is not a piece of scrap paper. The vellum before you is worth a small fortune, and the hours of work already inscribed on it are priceless. The thought of having to discard the entire sheet, of wasting the skin of a calf and days of labor because of one clumsy letter, is unthinkable. You cannot simply hit a delete key. The ink is already reacting with the vellum. Its iron gold spirit slowly, permanently biting into the skin. Though you do not panic. This is not the first time this has happened, and it will not be the last. Your predecessors, in their wisdom, developed methods for this very crisis. You are not just a writer. You are a repairman, a textual surgeon. This is where the mainstream, established practice of manuscript correction comes into play. You must erase the error, not by magic, but by careful, physical abrasion. You set your quill aside and reach for a different tool. It's another knife, smaller than your penknife, with a slightly curved, rounded blade that looks more like a surgeon's scalpel than a weapon. Some scribes use the back of their penknife for this, but having a dedicated erasing knife, its edge kept perfectly smooth, is the mark of a true professional. Its purpose is not to cut, but to scrape. With your left hand, you hold the vellum around the error dot, pulling it gently to create a firm, flat surface. Then, with the utmost care, you place the edge of the blade against the offending ink mark and begin to move it in a light, circular motion. You apply almost no pressure, letting the weight of the knife and the keenness of its edge do the work. High faint share sound fills your little carol, the only noise in the silent room. You are not cutting the vellum. You are meticulously scraping away its topmost layer, one microscopic shaving at a time. A5, white, powdery dust, a mixture of vellum particles and dried ink begins to accumulate. You gently blow it away. The work is nerve minus racking. If you press too hard, you will create a thin, weak spot in the vellum, or worse, tear a hole right through it. You must remove just enough of the surface to lift the ink, but leave enough thickness and strength for the page to remain sound. After a minute of careful scraping, the black mark has vanished. In its place is a slightly rough, fuzzy-minus looking patch on the vellum. It is now thinner than the surrounding area. You then take a burnish array smooth, though, polished stone or a piece of animal tooth and rub the scraped area vigorously. This ray minus compresses the fibers of the vellum, smoothing the surface back down so that it is once again ready to receive ink without causing it to bleed. The spot is repaired. The page is saved. Of course, scraping was the most common method. But what if the error was a whole word? Unscraping it would be too destructive. Here, scribes employed a wonderfully quirky and elegant solution, the X punctual dot. Instead of erasing the word, you would leave it on the page, but place a series of tiny dots or a thin line directly underneath it. This was a universally understood code among readers and scribes. This word is a mistake. Ignore it. It has been corrected for EXP unction. The erroneous word becomes a ghost, present but powerless. It was a subtle, non-minus destructive form of correction, often used when the scribe noticed the error much later and didn't want to risk scraping an already minus dried page. This leads to a fascinating debate among modern paleographers who was responsible for these corrections. Was it always the original scribe, catching his own mistakes in the moment, like you just did? Or did monasteries employ a dedicated corrector? This would have been a senior monk, the master scribe with the sharpest eyes, whose entire job was to read through the finished manuscripts, comparing them against the original text and marking any errors for correction. Some manuscripts showed a distinct hands at work in the corrections, suggesting a formal, 2-step proofreading process. Others show corrections made in the same hand ink as the main text, suggesting a scribe who was his own quality control. The answer likely varied, reflecting the size, wealth, and workflow of each individual scriptorium. Was your work checked by a stern minor-eyed elder, or were you trusted to be your own judge, jury, and executioner? You look at the successfully repaired spot on your vellum. The sense of relief is immense. You take a moment, letting your heart rate return to normal. Then, you pick up your quill, dip it carefully in the ink, and with a renewed and heightened sense of focus, you write the correct letter in the smoothed minus-out space. It sits perfectly. The crisis is over. The page is whole again. Its small scar a secret known only to you. The final letter of the final psalm is written. You lean back, the familiar ache in your spine making itself known, and you look at the page. The rich black of your iron gall ink forms neat, solid cones of text. The vibrant vermilion announces each new beginning. The touch of green and precious blue on the opening folio glows with an inner light. The book is finished. A wave of exhaustion and profound, quiet satisfaction washes over you. You did not just copy words. You gave them a beautiful, enduring body. You take the loose stacks of vellum, the completed quires, and hand them over to another brother, the bookbinder. It is his art that will now take over, sewing the quires together and encasing them in a strong cover of wooden leather. Your part in the creation of this specific object is over. Now, you can't help but let your mind drift forward, beyond your own lifetime. You look at the ink on your fingers, the same ink now drying on the pages of the Psalms, and you wonder about its journey. What will become of this book, of this ink? This is where the story of your ink truly begins its 1,000-year voyage. For the first few centuries, the book might remain right here, in your monastery's library, the quiet, cold room where it is stored with other precious texts. It will be brought out on special feast days, its pages turned carefully by the abbot, the rich black of your ink sharp and clear against the creamy vellum. But the world outside your stone walls is restless. Perhaps, in a generation or two, a wave of Viking raiders will sail up the river. The monastery bells will ring in alarm, and in a frantic rush, you and your brothers will gather the most precious treasures, the silver chalice, the saint's relics, and this very book, and flee into the hills, burying it in a wooden chest for safekeeping. This is the mainstream historical narrative for many surviving Irish manuscripts, a story of miraculous survival against all odds. Centuries pass, the monastery may fall into ruin, its library scattered. The book, now an ancient relic, might pass into the hands of a wealthy local lord, kept more as a symbol of status than a book to be read. Its origins become cloudy, its story half forgotten. Then, perhaps in the 17th or 18th century, an antiquarian, a scholar with a passion for the past, discovers it in a dusty collection. He opens it, marveling at the strange, beautiful script and the astonishingly well preserved covers. He can see that the black ink is still intensely black. He might even note, with a scholar's curiosity, that, in a few places, the ink has eaten tiny holes through the page, a sign of a slightly imbalance. Acidic batch. Your small error in chemical proportion has become a data point for a future historian. This is where your creation moves from the realm of craft into the realm of science. In a laboratory, a millennium from now, a conservator in a white coat will lean over your manuscript. She will use instruments you could not possibly imagine, microscopes that magnify your letters 1,000 times, revealing the individual fibers of the vellum and the way the ink has settled into them. She will use a technique called Raman spectroscopy, firing a harmless laser beam smaller than a human hair at one of your letters. The way the light scatters back will reveal the exact chemical fingerprint of the substance. This brings us to a wonderfully quirky and specific detail of modern science. The analysis can be so precise that it can not only identify the iron and tannins of your ink, but it can also detect trace elements, the impurities. It might detect a hint of manganese or zinc. These trace elements form a unique signature, a sort of DNA of your ink. By comparing this signature to the chemical makeup of bog iron samples from different regions of Ireland, the scientist might be able to say, with astonishing probability, this ink was made with iron from a bog in County Clare, pinpointing the location of your long-minus vanished monastery. Your quiet walk to the bog has left a clue that will echo through 1,000 years of history. But even with all this science, debates will rage. One team of scholars might analyze the binder and declare, based on its protein signature, that you used GL, hair egg white. Another team might analyze a different page, find traces of polysaccharides, and argue passionately that you used gum arabic. They might spend years debating this point, writing papers, and presenting at conferences. What they don't know, what they can't possibly know, is that you simply used GLA for the red and gum arabic for the black. The great binder debate that occupies them is simply a reflection of your practical, day minus to minus day choices as a craftsman. Their search for a single, unified theory misses the simple, human reality of your workshop. You look at the ink pot on your desk. You have no way of knowing any of this. Of course, for you, the ink's future is a matter of faith. You have done your best. You have followed the traditions. You have used the best materials you could find. You have created an ink that is, you pray, worthy of the sacred words it records. You hope it will last. You hope that someone, a long time from now, will be able to read these words and feel a glimmer of the same reverence you felt as you wrote them. Your legacy is not in your name, which will be forgotten, but in the enduring blackness of the ink itself. You clean your quill, scraping away the dried residue of black ink, and place it in its box. Your own great work, the Book of Songs, has moved on to the binder, but the pot of ink remains on your desk, a silent, dark pool of potential. It is a humble thing, this mixture of boiled tree minus goals untrusted earth, held together with sticky gum, and yet, the recipe for it, the knowledge currently held within your mind, is one of the most powerful and enduring technologies your world will ever know. You are a link in a chain of knowledge that stretches far back into the Roman past, and you have just forged a new link that will stretch forward into a future you cannot imagine. The core principles of the ink you have just made, the sacred marriage of tannic acid from galls and iron salt from vitriol, will not remain an Irish secret. This is the central, mainstream fact of its incredible legacy. This recipe will become the standard writing fluid of an entire continent for more than 1,000 years. It will write the history of the world that is to come. 100 years from now, a scholar in a newly founded university in Paris will use it to dispute points of theology. 500 years from now, a merchant in Florence will use it to balance his ledgers, inadvertently inventing the science of accounting. 800 years from now, a playwright in London will dip his quill into a pot of this same black ink to write words that will redefine the very language his people speak. Kings will sign their charters with it. Popes will issue their bulls with it. Scientists will draw their revolutionary diagrams of the cosmos with it. The great documents of nations yet unborn, the treaties, the laws, the declarations of independence, will all be written in the direct descendant of the ink that sits cooling in your ceramic pot. Its enduring, biting, permanent blackness will become the color of authority, of history, of truth itself, the fundamental recipe goal. Vitriol, water, binder is so robust, so effective, that it will remain essentially unchallenged for 1,500 years. Of course, the recipe will not remain static. It will evolve. Future ink minus makers will tinker with the formula, adding their own grace notes and solving problems that you simply had to accept. This is where we find some of the quirky, clever innovations within the tradition. You, for instance, had to learn to write with a pale grey ink. trusting that the air would slowly darken it to black on the page. But a scribe in the 17th century might solve this problem by adding a pinch of a dark dye, like indigo or the juice of logwood from the newly discovered Americas, to his formula. This provisional colorant would make the ink a satisfying dark blue minus black from the moment it left the quill, making it easier to see, while still allowing the permanent iron gold reaction to work its magic underneath. They are standing on your shoulders, refining the tradition you helped preserve. And what about the end of this great tradition? When does this 1,000-year reign finally draw to a close? This is a subject of quiet but persistent debate among future historians of technology and writing. There was no single event that killed iron galling. The invention of the printing press in the 15th century was not its death knell. In fact, it created a new demand for different kinds of oil-based printing inks. But iron gall ink was still used for all hand-written editions and legal documents. The decline was a slow, creeping thing that happened much later. In the 19th century, with the dawn of industrial chemistry, men in laboratories began to create entirely synthetic aniline dyes from coal tar, producing inks of every imaginable color, cheaply and in vast quantities. At the same time, the quill was finally giving way to the mass-produced steel pen nib. Iron galling, being acidic, was highly corrosive to these new steel nibs, eating them away. The demand grew for more chemically neutral, less reactive inks that would work well with the new tools of a faster, more industrial world. So when was the tipping point? Was it the invention of a specific synthetic dye? Was it the widespread adoption of the steel pen? Or was it simply a cultural shift away from the slow, craft-based traditions of your world to a new era of mass production? Scholars still argue about the precise timeline in the primary course. They debate the moment when your creation, the gold standard for a millennium and a half, became a relic, a specialty item for artists and history enthusiasts. You, of course, know nothing of this. You look at your pot of ink, and you do not see a technology on a long, slow journey towards obsolescence. You see a perfect, living tradition. The knowledge came to you from Brother Chiron, and one day you will take a young novice to the oak forest, show him how to find the right galls, and pass the knowledge on to him. For you, here and now, in the quiet of the scriptorium, the tradition is not ending. It is in your hands, dark, potent, and eternal. The tradition feels safe in your hands, but it is a heavy thing to carry. The weight of 1,000 years to come, which you felt for a moment, was just a phantom. Your reality is much simpler, much more immediate. It is the end of a long day. The light from the narrow window has turned from a soft grey to a deep, bruised purple. The Vespers bell has rung, its solemn, bronze voice calling the brothers to evening prayer. The workday is over. With a slow, deliberate motion that is born of both reverence and weariness, you put the stopper in your ink pot. You wipe the nib of your quill clean with a soft piece of linen, ensuring no residue remains to corrupt the next day's work. You place it back in its wooden box alongside its feathered brethren. You look at your desk, at the neat arrangement of your tools, the burnisher, the scraping knife, the pound spot. They are your companions, silent partners in this sacred craft. You gather the scraps of vellum from your tests and corrections, tucking them away to be used for notes or practice. Nothing is wasted. You stand up, and the simple act of stretching your back sends a cascade of satisfying cracks down your spine. You walk to the narrow window and look out. The monastery courtyard below is empty and silent, bathed in the soft, fading light of dusk. The sharp edges of the stone walls have softened, and a gentle mist is beginning to rise from the damp earth of the garth. The world outside seems to be holding its breath, settling into the quiet of the coming night. This is the mainstream, cyclical nature of your life, a day of focus, intense work, followed by a moment of quiet reflection as the world goes dark, all bracketed by the call of the bells. You look down at your hands. The ink has stained the skin around your fingernails and settled into the creases of your knuckles. It is a mark of your trade, a permanent shadow that no amount of scrubbing with sand and water can fully remove. You are marked by your word, branded by the very substance you create, and in this moment, looking out at the peaceful twilight, You feel an immense and profound sense of calm. The aches, the frustrations, the moments of panic over a spilled drop or a clumsy letter, they all fade away. What remains is the work itself, the pages you have filled, the knowledge you have preserved. It is a quiet, solid accomplishment that settles deep in your soul. As you stand there, you remember a small detail from the day's work. On the bottom of one of the pages of the Psalms, in a space where the text ended halfway down the column, you allowed yourself a small, personal touch. After carefully ruling the rest of the page to keep the space clean, you took your quill and, in a moment of quiet contemplation, you drew a tiny, intricate Celtic knot. It was not in the original manuscript you were copying. It was your own small, silent prayer, a tangle of lines with no beginning and no end. A meditation on eternity offered up in the same ink as the holy words above it. This is a quirky, human impulse that future scholars will cherish. They will call these little drawings marginalia, and they will find them in manuscripts all across Europe at chasing a mouse, a weary minus-looking face, a knight fighting a snail, a detailed drawing of a flower, and they will debate endlessly their purpose. Was this little knot you drew a sign of boredom? A mind wandering from the repetitive task? Was it a form of decoration? An unconscious overflow of the same artistic impulse that created the great, illuminated letters? Or was it a mnemonic device? A personal symbol to help you remember something on that page? Was it, perhaps, a form of spiritual deeding? A way of focusing your mind and channeling your devotion into an odd-minus textual form? You, of course, had your own simple reason. The knot felt right. It filled the empty space with a quiet beauty that honored the text it accompanied. It was a moment of connection, a small, anonymous signature of your presence on the page. You smile faintly at the thought of it. You turn from the window. The scriptorium is now deep in shadow. The tools on the desks around you reduced to dark, indistinct shapes. Your work is done. You have fought the good fight for one more day, armed without goals and diet. Then the steadfast, patient heart, you leave the silent room, pulling the heavy oak door closed behind you. The sound echoing softly in the empty hall. You head towards the chapel, ready to join your voice with your brothers in prayer, your mind calm and your spirit at peace. And so, the day ends. The deep, resonant sound of the evening chant fades, and the memory of it hangs in the air like a fine dust, settling gently upon every stone of the monastery. The chill you felt in your bones all day now seems to recede, replaced by a profound endured weariness that promises a deep and dreamless sleep. The story of the ink, with its forests and its bogs, its dangerous powders and its patient waiting, begins to dissolve into the quiet darkness of your own comfortable room. You can feel the hard wooden bench soften into your own bed, the cold stone floor transform into a familiar warmth. The faint, scratchy sound of the quill on vellum is replaced by the soft, rhythmic hum of the fan you might have turned on hours ago, a sound that has been waiting patiently in the background to carry you off to sleep. The weight of the sacred text, the responsibility of the scribe, is lifted from your shoulders, and you are left only with the simple, pleasant sensation of letting go. There are no more tasks to complete, no more pages to fill. The ink is made, the words are written, and the story has been told. Now, there is only the gentle, welcome pull of slumber, a quiet tide drawing you out into a sea of peace. The journey is over. It is time to rest.